I think this is why it's such a difficult moment for the royal family, because you cannot put a cap on where this goes. Who gets questioned by the police, what those disclosures, investigations reveal. There's no seeming end in sight to this. So, and as you say, it could go on for many years. So any chance of a quick fix to this situation is just not there. And that's why it's really potentially quite damaging.
We'll dwell a little bit more on that and get into some of the other politics kicking around today with Joe Mays, who's the UK politics reporter for Bloomberg, or one of the team. Joe, great to have you on. Before we get to the other stuff, what do you make of this defence spending? With very stark warning from our people in NATO that, Keir Starmer can't just talk up raising defence spending down the line by the end of the next parliament and all that. The time is now.
Royal Protection Officer.
Sorry, there is a credibility gap between what the government is saying and the way it says it wants to be a leading member of NATO, and then, as you say, having a GDP proportion which is increasingly sliding down the league table. There is this sense that the Treasury is resistant to that extra spend. Keir Starmer says they need to go faster, but you can't reconcile the statements of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor at this point. There needs to be someone who's going to have to give here, and at the moment, it's not the Treasury. So Starmer might have to overrule Reeves on this question. We'll have to wait and see.
And what about the call from my old boss, Boris Johnson, that we should be sending non-combat troops, in substantial numbers, substantial enough that Vladimir Putin noticed this, to Ukraine 4 years on?
Yeah, and I mean, the capability of the British Army at this point is not particularly high. So that sounds like it would be a worthy cause, but whether the British military feels like it has the resource to do so at this point is a big question mark. And that's why this spending matter has to be resolved, because until it is, the UK government can say all sorts of things it would like to do in the military, but it won't be able to deliver because the money and the resources are not there.
So, a story on the front page of the Sunday Times today, the two Met police officers, Royal Protection basically, escorting Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to New York back in 2010, ended up essentially being deployed as bouncers outside the Manhattan townhouse of Jeffrey Epstein, sort of to basically protect the guests, which included people like Katie Couric, the journalist, and Woody Allen, people like that. On a scale of 1 to 10, knowing everything that breaks these days about that, how bad is this for another British institution, if you like, the cops?
I think this goes somewhere in the middle, because on one hand, you'd say if they were there to protect Prince Andrew, the former Prince Andrew, as his close protection officers, that's probably the natural place for them to be, right? If he's at that party, they would think we want to protect him, so we'll be on the door. But what the embarrassment comes in, where it was Epstein's staff, as you see from the files, giving them the instructions seemingly and kind of coordinating with him and his private people as how it should be done. So that's where I think the problem arises. But then also, and that's what the Met Police said on Friday, they are now investigating or beginning to conduct inquiries into the close protection officers to see if they knew of potential criminal activity that might have been happening. And that's where you can see where this comes in, because there is that potential connection. They were clearly present at moments where, the police are investigating what happened. So I think that's where the problems are arising.
Former Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown is on the front page of the Telegraph. Odd place for him to be in a good way, and calling for police to probe Andrew's use of jets. And he's written, lengthy letters, which he was infamous for back in the day. But he's written to 6 police forces, basically saying we've got to look into flights in and out of Britain. This thing could just expand and expand and expand and go on and on and on.
Yes, and Gordon Brown has taken on this quite remarkable role, first in the Mandelson case, but now this one too, effectively providing an immense public service of providing documents and using his knowledge from when he was Prime Minister to help further these inquiries. And as you say, I think this is why it's such a difficult moment for the royal family, because you cannot put a cap on where this goes. Who gets questioned by the police, what those disclosures, investigations reveal. There's no seeming end in sight to this. So, and as you say, it could go on for many years. So any chance of a quick fix to this situation is just not there. And that's why it's really potentially quite damaging.
So one of the select committees in Parliament, the Business and Trade Select Committee, is going to meet on Tuesday, and they're going to talk about launching an inquiry into the role of UK trade envoys. They're cleverly focusing it on the role, if you like, not one individual who happened to do that in the case of the former Prince Andrew. But again, there'll be, what is the risk now, do you think, that there'll be various tools, various kind of devices in our democracy deployed in order to sort of expand this and get deeper and deeper into it? Perhaps rightly, but it could take over an awful lot of our politics.
Yes, I mean, the Business and Trade Committee clearly doesn't want to prejudice any criminal proceedings, hence why they're not looking specifically at Andrew himself and what he might have done as a trade envoy. But as you say, by looking at that institution, we're really shining a light here on, parts of government, parts of politics, which might not have had the attention they probably should have had. Having covered politics for some time now, to me, the role of a trade envoy is still quite unclear. But, politicians want to be seen to be addressing these issues whilst being sensitive to ongoing police investigations. And in my sense, I think, as you've pointed out, is that we're going to have on our front pages, on our broadcasts for weeks, months, still years to come, a discussion of these issues. Very
quick one. Kemi Badenoch, she's basically, because our papers have been campaigning for it here, she's now come out very strongly against the unfair interest rates on student loans, calling for them to be scrapped because, in her words, feels like a scam. Significant?
Pretty significant, effectively arguing there should be a halving of the interest rates for those who are paying the most at this point. And under her proposal, it seems like you would get a situation where you wouldn't have interest accruing so much that you effectively are never paying off the debt, which is really getting to lots of people. And they say they would cost it by reducing the number of university places by 100,000. So it's a pretty significant and serious proposal. Let's see how Labour responds.
Joe, thanks very much indeed for joining us. A lot to pile through today, and most of these stories are not going away. Thank you.